Travel down the road from my home in South County Galway, just a few miles, and you come to Dunguaire Castle. It's on the outskirts of the village of Kinvara, nestled in Galway Bay, on a tiny little promontory that I'm sure would at one stage have been surrounded by water. It was built in the early 1500s, and then it fell into disrepair over the centuries. It was restored in the early 20th century by Oliver St. John Gogarty, a very big Dublin character, a surgeon, a poet, a political activist, a generally larger-than-life bon vivant, and he had lots of literary parties in Dunguaire Castle in the early part of the 20th century. And then it was bought from him by Christabel Baroness Ampthill in the early 1950s. She was also a crazy character by all accounts. Well, I think she must have been anyway. She was a very tall woman, 5'11", and she was a magnificent horsewoman. She was crazy about her horses. So I suppose it must have seemed like a good idea to leave her home in England and a rather messy social life that she'd left behind there. She had had a really bad divorce, which had been in the courts and all over the press. It must have seemed like a great idea to come and live in Kinvara and spend every day riding to hounds and bothering foxes, which is what she did. Once I was visiting the castle and I got into conversation with a guide, an older man, on the ground floor, and I was on my own, so he started telling me a little story about how when he was a young fella, I wonder if it was actually him involved now that I think of it, but he said that Lady Ampthill was on her way to a race meet one day and her horses were all ready and they were in their horse box and ready to go, and her phone rang and she was called down to the village and off she went. And when she got there she found out that it was fake. She went back to the castle none too pleased and off she went to the race meet, and when she got there she found that her two beautiful horses had been swapped for a pair of donkeys while she was on that fake errand into Kinvara village. And she was very cross, as you can imagine. Here's another little sketch I did of the front view of the castle. These days, the castle is owned by Shannon Heritage. They operate the tourism of the castle, including a medieval banquet, which is held every night during the summer. They're great fun. You get to drink mead and you are entertained by actors reciting plays and singing songs, and it's all in all a great evening's entertainment. And now back to today's sketch. I put the initial lines on in watercolour. This is always a good idea because it means that you kind of get a handle on the shape and position of your subject before you start putting on any ink lines. Now you can see there's a bit of a blob in the middle. I'd already made a mistake before too long had passed. Now the tide was sort of, it wasn't in but it wasn't out either. It was sort of a midway point. But I knew it was likely to change quite a lot, so I'd have to get cracking. I decided to put the castle at one side because it made a better composition. Now, what have we got here? Well, I realised that if I wanted to include the reflection, I was going to have to get rid of all the lovely lines that I'd made. And so this is why they're a bit faded here. I washed them all out with clean water and I started again and I put in my shape higher up. And you can see here how that came out. This is why it's so useful to do watercolour first, because you do get a second chance. So I decided to keep the same scale but to move it up the page. Okay, so in this one I've thrown on the clouds, and I've done that by putting clean water on. I've spoken about this before, and dropping very dilute colour for the clouds into the bottom parts of the clouds. And then when everything's dry, I start picking out the lines in ink, and I used a brown ink. And by the way, I'm always conscious that the tide is going to change very quickly, so if there is a reflection that I like, I put it in. Ooh, it came out quite well here. It was very, very clear for a couple of moments. And I painted in the reflection because you never know whether you're going to be able to paint that at a later date. So I'm picking out the lines in dark brown ink and the reflection in sort of a soft Payne's grey stroke shadow grey sort of a colour. Well, much as I'd love to film every little stage and all the build-up of the colours and so on, I'm afraid I can't do that because I have to concentrate, especially when I'm in a bit of a panic trying to capture the tide and the reflection and so on. So you're coming to the painting now when it's almost finished. So once again, not that many colours as is my want. We've got a sludgy green made by using Aquarius green and a few different shades of brown. And by the time I'd finished this sketch, the tide had gone completely out and there was no way I would have been able to capture it. So I was glad. You can see it's really dropping there. So I was glad to have recorded it. Now, the reason I've zoomed up here is because there's a fight going on. We have 3 species of birds. We have seagulls, we have herons, and we have egrets, and they're all squabbling very noisily over this patch of water, which must be a very choice patch of water because, my goodness, they really, really were, well, not quite at each other's throats, but not far off that. Look, squabble, squabble, squabble. The seagulls are making the egrets go away, and the egrets are making the seagulls go away, and the herons are making everyone go away. And you don't normally see so many herons together. So I don't know if this is a breeding ground or just a hunting ground. And I imagine all these birds are in it for the same thing. Small fish or, I don't know, shellfish, mussels maybe. But it was really nice to look at it. And herons are normally very skittish and fly away as soon as they see humans. But these herons were clearly so taken up with their squabbles that they didn't really notice my presence. Now the painting was done especially for the Kinvara Plein Air Painting Festival, which takes place over the June bank holiday weekend. Ooh, I like that one. Look at the shaft of light right on the tricolour. And here's the finished piece all framed up nicely. And it's going to look really nice, I think, with the other paintings I've done of the areas. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this little visit to Dunguaire Castle in Kinvara in County Galway. And thank you so much for watching. I look forward to seeing you next time.